World War II was a terrible time. Millions of soldiers fought, many were captured. They became prisoners of war, or POWs. Life for a POW was hard, very hard. They faced boredom, hunger, and loneliness. They were cut off from their families, from the news, from everything normal. Most lived in camps far from home, behind fences and watchful eyes. Escaping seemed impossible, but some tried, and sometimes help came from the most surprising places. Places like a simple board game. This is the story of how a familiar game, Monopoly, became a secret weapon, helping brave men find their way home. Imagine being a soldier, fighting for your country. Then one day, you are surrounded. You are captured. Your world changes in an instant. You are no longer free, you are a prisoner. This was the reality for thousands of Allied soldiers in World War II. They were taken to camps run by the Germans, Italians, or Japanese. These camps were places of despair. Life inside a POW camp was grim, it was a daily struggle. Food was scarce and often terrible. Sanitation was poor. Sickness spread easily. Guards were everywhere, armed and watchful. The days stretched on long and empty. There was little to do. Many men simply gave up hope. Their spirits were broken. The Geneva Convention set out rules for how prisoners should be treated, but these rules were often ignored or bent by the captors. Even when the rules were followed, life was still incredibly tough. Prisoners needed clothes, food, and medical supplies. These often came through the Red Cross, an organization that tried to help people in wartime. But getting things into the camps was always a challenge. Beyond the physical hardship, there was a deep psychological toll. Men missed their families. They worried about the war, they felt useless, they were away from the fight, trapped. This feeling of being trapped, of having no control, could break even the strongest person. Some men just waited for the war to end. But others, the ones with a spark, they looked for a way out. Escape attempts happened. They were risky, very risky. If you were caught, you faced harsh punishment. Solitary confinement, beatings, even death. But the desire for freedom was strong. It drove some men to try. They dug tunnels with spoons. They tried to sneak past guards. They made crude maps, but they had almost no proper tools. They had no real maps, no compasses, no money for when they got out. Their chances of success were tiny. Back in Britain, the government cared about its captured soldiers. They wanted to help them. Not just with food and clothes, but with a way to escape. Escape was important for morale. It showed the enemy that British soldiers would not give up. It also tied up enemy resources. Guards had to search for escaped prisoners. It was a drain on their time and men. So, helping POWs escape was not just a kindness, it was a military objective. But how do you help someone escape from inside a heavily guarded camp? You can't just send them a map and a file in the mail. The enemy would find it, they would stop it. So, a very clever plan was needed. A secret plan. A plan that could get essential escape tools right into the hands of the prisoners, without the enemy ever knowing. This was the challenge that a secret British intelligence unit, MI9, was given. They had to think outside the box. It's way outside. And one man, Christopher Clayton Hutton, was the key to making this impossible dream a reality. He understood that the best hiding places are often the most obvious ones. MI9 was a secret organization. Its job was simple: help Allied prisoners of war escape, and get intelligence from them. It was a new kind of spy agency, not about gathering secrets from the enemy, but about helping their own people. This was a tough job. The enemy watched every letter, every parcel that went into a camp. They searched everything. How could you get secret escape tools past them? This is where a brilliant mind named Christopher Clayton Hutton came in. Hutton was not a typical spy. He was an inventor, a clever thinker. He worked in advertising before the war. He understood how people thought. He knew how to make things look normal, even when they weren't. Hutton had a very clear idea: the best way to hide something is in plain sight. Hide it inside something so common, so ordinary, that no one would ever suspect it. Hutton's idea was simple, but genius. He wanted to use everyday items to smuggle escape aids. Think about it. What do prisoners get that looks innocent? Parcels. Parcels from home or from charities. These parcels often contain clothes, food, or games. Games! That was a perfect cover. Everyone expects games in a prisoner's parcel. The challenge was huge. Hutton and his team had to figure out how to put maps, compasses, and tools into these innocent items without anyone noticing. Not the enemy guards who inspected the parcels, not even the prisoners themselves at first. The prisoners needed to know how to find the hidden items, but the guards must not. MI9 set up a special workshop. It was hidden away. Here, skilled people worked in secret. They experimented, they tried different ways to hide things, they learned how to make paper-thin maps. They learned how to make tiny compasses. They practiced hiding them in things like shaving brushes, playing cards, even shoelaces. It was all about precision. Everything had to look and feel exactly right. If a game piece felt too heavy or a book looked too thick, it would be found. The whole operation depended on extreme secrecy. Only a very few people knew what was going on. Hutton and his small team, the people doing the actual hiding, and a network of fake charities. These charities were made up by MI9. They had innocent-sounding names like the Prisoner of War Relatives Committee. They sent parcels to POWs. This made the whole thing look legitimate. It made it seem like the parcels were coming from well-meaning people, not from a spy agency. The fake charities were very important. They were the cover story. They received lists of POW names from the Red Cross. Then, they would send out parcels. Most of these parcels were completely normal. They contained clothes, books, and regular games. But some parcels, chosen very carefully, would contain the special, altered items. This mix of real and fake parcels helped hide the secret ones. It was like finding a needle in a haystack for the enemy, but the haystack itself looked totally normal. Hutton thought about every detail. He even figured out a way to subtly mark the special parcels. These marks were tiny, almost invisible. They told the prisoners who were in on the secret which parcels contained the escape aids. But a German guard would never spot them. Maybe a small dot on a certain letter in the address. Or a particular way the package was tied. These were tiny clues, but they were life-saving. The scale of this operation was enormous. Thousands of prisoners in hundreds of camps across Europe. They all needed help. MI9 couldn't send an escape kit to everyone. It was too risky and too expensive. So, they had to be selective. They targeted specific camps where the chances of escape were higher, or where key officers were held. The plan was audacious. It was risky, but it was also brilliant. It relied on human ingenuity, precision, and the power of disguise. It showed that even in the darkest of times, clever thinking could open doors to freedom. And one of the most successful disguises for these vital tools was a game loved by millions, Monopoly. Monopoly was a perfect choice. Everyone knew the game. Families played it. Soldiers played it before the war. It was popular, innocent, and its components lent themselves perfectly to hiding things. Think about a Monopoly set. It has a board, game pieces, cards, money, and a box. Each of these parts could be altered without raising suspicion. Christopher Clayton Hutton and his team at MI9 looked at a standard Monopoly set. They saw not just a game, but a treasure chest of escape tools. The game board itself was key. Underneath the colorful paper surface, they would hide maps. Not just any maps, these were special maps. They were printed on silk or very thin tissue paper. Silk was good because it didn't crinkle or make noise. It was waterproof and could be folded tiny. These maps showed the areas around the POW camps. They showed routes to neutral countries like Switzerland or Spain. They showed rivers, roads, and railway lines. These maps were painstakingly accurate, and they were hidden by gluing them to the underside of the game board. When the prisoner got the game, they could carefully peel off the paperboard to reveal the map. No one would ever think to look there. Then there were the game pieces, the little metal thimbles, hats, cars, and dogs. These were too small to hide much. But what about the wooden houses and hotels, or even the dice? Hutton's team thought about everything. They even found ways to embed tiny compasses. Some compasses were made to look like common buttons. These buttons could be sewn onto a uniform. Or a small, working compass could be hidden inside a hollowed-out game pawn. You'd break it open, and there it was. A tiny needle pointing the way to freedom. These compasses were essential for navigation once a prisoner was out of the camp. Without them, it was easy to get lost, especially at night. The game money was another opportunity. Monopoly has lots of fake paper money, but amidst these brightly colored playnotes, MI9 would often hide real money. Actual British pounds, US dollars, or German Reichsmarks. These were vital for escaping prisoners. They needed to buy food, find shelter, or pay for transport once they were outside the camp. The real money was carefully folded and mixed in with the fake notes, or sometimes it was tucked into a hollow space in the game box itself. Different currencies were used depending on where the camp was and where the escape route led. This meant more complex planning and organization for Hutton's team. Tools were perhaps the most important items. How do you get a saw or a file into a camp? MI9 found creative ways. Small, thin saws made from a special kind of steel were hidden. They could be disguised as rulers, or, even more ingeniously, they were pressed into a deck of playing cards. Imagine a deck of cards with a razor-thin saw blade running through the middle of some of the cards. When you wanted to use it, you'd snap the cards apart and there was your saw. These saws could cut through metal bars or wooden planks. They were slow, but they worked. Tiny files were also hidden, sometimes inside the game pieces themselves or along the edge of the game box. The production of these altered games was a masterclass in secret manufacturing. Skilled artisans, often people with backgrounds in printing or model making, worked with incredible precision. They had to make sure that once the items were hidden, the game still looked and felt completely normal. The weight had to be right. The packaging had to be perfect. Everything had to be resealed and shrink-wrapped exactly as it would be from the factory. If a German guard picked up a Monopoly box and it felt slightly off, or the cellophane looked tampered with, the whole operation could be exposed. The fake charities were the front. They ordered thousands of Monopoly sets and other games from the real manufacturers. Then, a small percentage of these would be diverted to the secret MI9 workshop. There, the modifications were made. After the escape aids were hidden, the games were then sent back into the normal distribution channels. They were then shipped to POW camps via the Red Cross or other official channels. The risks were high. Every parcel was opened and inspected by German sensors. They would look for messages. They would probe for hidden items. But because the hiding spots were so clever, so unexpected, most of these altered games got through. The very ordinariness of Monopoly was its greatest defense. Who would ever suspect a friendly board game of being a Trojan horse of freedom? It was a true testament to human ingenuity against oppression. Once a special Monopoly game or another altered item arrived at a POW camp, the real work began for the prisoners. They had to know what to look for, and they did. MI9 developed a system of subtle signals. These signals were not random, they were carefully designed to pass unnoticed by the German guards, but to be clear to the men looking for them. Sometimes, a specific company that sent the parcel would be the sign, or a unique stamp on the packaging. Perhaps a tiny, almost invisible dot on a particular letter in the return address. These were small clues, but for men desperate for freedom, these tiny marks were like beacons of hope. They knew if their parcel had the mark, it contained something special. The moment a prisoner discovered the hidden tools must have been electrifying. Imagine the quiet excitement, the surge of hope. A simple game, looking like any other, suddenly held the promise of escape. The discovery process itself required care, peeling back the Monopoly board to reveal the silk map, carefully breaking open a pawn to find a tiny compass, unsnapping a deck of cards to pull out a thin saw blade. All done in secret, away from prying eyes, often at night, under the dim light of a bunk. These tools transformed the landscape of escape. Before, men had to improvise with spoons, rusty nails, or memory. Now, they had real tools. They had accurate maps, they had compasses, they had money. The maps were invaluable. They gave prisoners a clear picture of the surrounding area. They could plan routes to safety, avoiding towns or enemy strongholds. Knowing the terrain, where the rivers were, where the forests offered cover, drastically improved their chances of avoiding recapture. Printed on silk, these maps were durable and quiet. They could be hidden easily, even sewn into clothing. The compasses, often disguised as buttons or small metal objects, provided direction. Escaping at night was common, to use the cover of darkness, but without a compass, it's easy to get disoriented. A tiny compass, small enough to hide in a cigarette tin or a hollowed-out piece of bread, meant they could travel with purpose, always heading towards neutral territory. The saws and files were for getting through obstacles. Camp fences were formidable. Barbed wire, concrete posts, watchtowers, but with a small, sharp saw, metal bars could be cut. Wooden planks in a fence could be removed. It was slow, backbreaking work, often done over many nights. But it was possible. The sound had to be muffled. The dust and shavings had to be carefully collected and hidden. This required immense patience and coordination among the prisoners. And the real money? That was their lifeline outside the camp. Once a prisoner got through the fences, they were in enemy territory. They needed to blend in, they needed to buy food, a train ticket, or a bribe. Having real currency meant they weren't just helpless fugitives. They had a chance to become, temporarily, just another person traveling. It made all the difference in covering long distances and reaching safety. The escape itself was a terrifying ordeal. Even with the best tools, the journey was full of danger. German patrols, police, dogs, and civilian informers were everywhere. Hunger, cold, and exhaustion were constant companions. But the tools from MI9 gave them a fighting chance. Some escapes involved tunneling. The saws helped cut through supports. The maps helped guide the tunnel direction. Some involved cutting through multiple layers of wire fences, often at great personal risk, under the cover of a diversion. Others were more audacious, hiding in transport vehicles, leaving the camp. No matter the method, the hidden tools played a crucial part. Beyond the practical help, these hidden aids provided something even more important: hope. For men whose lives were filled with despair and boredom, the very existence of these escape kits was a huge morale booster. It showed them that their country had not forgotten them. It showed them that there was a plan, a possibility, a light at the end of the tunnel. It rekindled their will to survive, to resist, and to return home. Every successful escape, every man who made it back to Allied lines, was a victory not just for that individual, but for the spirit of all POWs. The impact of these ingenious escape kits, especially those hidden in games like Monopoly, was significant. While exact numbers are hard to pin down, because much of the operation remained secret for decades after the war, hundreds of Allied prisoners used these aids to escape. Each escape was a testament to the bravery of the prisoners and the extraordinary cleverness of Christopher Clayton Hutton and his team at MI9. These escapes were not just about individual freedom, they had strategic value. Every escaped soldier who returned to duty was a gain for the Allied forces. Every escape attempt, successful or not, forced the enemy to divert resources. Guards had to be more vigilant. Search parties had to be sent out. This tied up manpower and attention that could have been used elsewhere. It was a constant psychological pressure on the enemy. The psychological impact on the prisoners themselves was immense. Even for those who never attempted an escape or who never received one of the special parcels, the knowledge that such an operation existed was a powerful morale booster. It transformed the feeling of being abandoned into a sense of being supported, even from thousands of miles away. It gave them something to hope for, something to talk about, something to keep their minds active. This sustained hope was crucial in camps where despair was a constant threat. The operation also highlighted the incredible ingenuity that arises under pressure. Hutton's team had to constantly innovate. They had to think several steps ahead of the enemy sensors. They had to find ways to make things look normal, even when they were designed for escape. This blend of practicality, psychology, and meticulous craftsmanship was remarkable. The tools were not just hidden, they were integrated so perfectly that they became part of the everyday world of the prisoner, until the moment of revelation. For decades after the war, the full extent of this operation remained a secret. It was only much later that the stories began to emerge. The legend of the Monopoly game with hidden maps became a famous tale, but the true scope and the meticulous details of MI9's work were often understated. The Red Cross, which unwittingly facilitated the delivery of many of these altered parcels, did not know about the secret contents. They were simply doing their vital humanitarian work, providing aid to prisoners. This layered deception was key to the operation's success. The legacy of the Monopoly escape kits is not just a tale of espionage. It's a powerful story about human resilience. It shows what people can achieve when faced with extreme adversity. It demonstrates the profound impact of hope and how even small acts of ingenuity can lead to profound results. It reminds us that even in the darkest corners of war, there were quiet heroes working behind the scenes, creating pathways to freedom. Today, many of the original altered games and escape tools are preserved in museums. They stand as silent witnesses to a time of great peril and even greater human spirit. They are simple objects: a game board, a playing card, a button, but their true purpose was extraordinary. They were instruments of liberation. They were a simple board game that helped POWs escape in WWII, a quiet triumph in a world of loud battles, proving that sometimes the most powerful weapons are hidden in plain sight.